Hello and welcome back to another video in the Complete Web Dev series. In this chapter we are working on React.js and we're building an example to-do application that interfaces with our API that we built in the last chapter with Node.js. What we talked about in the last house, we showed the basics of how to build out a component, and we used a button component as an example. We're very soon going to be getting to the part where we need to start setting up forms and stuff. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set up our input fields as a component. So we're going to do a little bit more practice in this video setting up a component and using prop types and default values to make sure that we are passing in the props that are needed for this component to work correctly. And so without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump in. Now, I know that I'm not posting as often, but I would like for you guys to comment, like, and subscribe so that you get notified as soon as I release a video. And let's get going. Enough of the unimportant stuff. So here we go. So right now, I'm on master here on the to-do, and I'm going to go ahead and create a new branch. So we'll do get checkout -b. This is going to be v4. It's our 4th video in this series. And then I'm going to go ahead and push, and we'll set up stream to origin v4. All right, and now if I hit get branch, you can see all of my local branches here, and you can see that I'm currently on v4. So I'm going to go ahead and clear that out. We don't need that right now, and I'm going to switch over to a new tab here. If I do a get status, it will update this to show that I'm on v4. So let me go ahead and clear this, and what I want to do here is go ahead and start my React server, and we do that by typing npm start. And this is a script that was set up for us in our package.json file when we installed the application. And that's going to go ahead and open up our application on localhost port 3000. Now that we have localhost open on port 3000, we're going to continue to build this, and as we make changes or saves, this will auto refresh when it detects a change, so we don't need to worry about that. So what I'd like for you guys to do is we're going to need a couple files open, and we're going to need the app index and the app.css open, but we're going to need a new file as well. So go ahead and navigate to source components, and we're going to add another component in our elements directory here. So let's create not a folder, let's create a new file here, and we're going to call this field block.js. All right, once we have that open, we need to go ahead and import prop types because we're going to use prop types. But at first, let's wait until we do need that. So let's go ahead and just type const field block. I'm going to give this an extra line here we're going to create a constant called field block, and we're going to set equal to this a function. We're using a functional component here, and we're going to use the arrow function syntax here that came with ES6, which we have Babel will fix this for browsers that don't support this, so don't worry about that. And we're going to pass in props as a parameter here because we're going to need props. And then down here at the very bottom of the file, we're going to go ahead and export the default component here, which is just called field block. So if you import anything from this field block, you can just use it. So here we go. This is going to be a fairly simple component as well, but we're going to need to return something here. So let's go ahead and return a div. So we're going to open up a div, and we're going to give this a class name equal to, and we're going to use the curly brackets here. I'm going to go ahead and close that div. And in here, we're going to use a string literal. So in JavaScript, to use a string literal, you just go ahead and use backticks. And we're going to give this a class of form-group. And then we're going to give it a space. And then we're going to do $ curly brackets. And we're going to pass in something called invalid class. And the reason that we're going to have an invalid class, which we got to create this still, is I want to pass invalid or is invalid as a class name to this div if this field has an error. So we're going to have form validation, and we want to make sure that we're going to visually show some styles if there's an error. So let's go ahead and create that real quick. We're going to say const invalid class, and what we're going to do here is that we're going to use a ternary operator, and we're going to say if props.isInvalid, then we're going to give this a class of is-invalid. Else, we're just going to give it an empty string, and so that'll plug that in right there. So if props passes isInvalid true into here, it's going to have a class of form group and a class of isInvalid. Okay, and we'll add to our CSS in a little bit to make that work. The next thing we want in this field block is a label, and in this label, we are going to use curly brackets right in the middle there, and we're just going to pass our props.label right into that. Okay, so that whatever we pass down as props label will get put in here. And then we're going to use HTML4, which is React's way of passing a for element here. We're going to use HTML4, and we're going to say props.id. That's it for our label. Now let's go ahead and add our input. So our input, we're going to give it a class name equal to form control. I'm kind of stealing these class names from Bootstrap, but we're not using Bootstrap. We're just going to write our own classes for these. But you could use Bootstrap if you want. And then we give this an ID of props.id. And in order to do that, we need to use curly brackets. So props.id. And then we're going to give it a name attribute, which will be props.name. And if that doesn't exist, then we're going to just give it props.id. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to give it a value. The value is going to be equal to props.value. And then we'll use type is equal to props.type, and then we'll give it one more, and maybe we'll break this down to a couple lines here. Just to make it a little easier to read. So then we're going to give this, after type, we'll give it an onChange equal to, you guessed it, props.onChange. So this is going to be controlled mainly through props, and a lot of the props are going to get passed directly down into this input. We could do something like, basically, we could get our props out of here, and we could destructure it and just pass props destructured down into this and everything that was in props, but then we couldn't do any further processing on it, so we'll just do it like this for now, just to make it a little simpler too to read. And then we're going to use a paragraph tag, and we're going to give it a class name of form feedback. And then in curly brackets here, we're going to pass props.feedback into that. Okay, so that is the entirety of our component. We're basically just going to create some HTML. It's going to have a div, a label, an input, and a form feedback element at the bottom so that we can put feedback there. All right. So the next thing we want to do is we do want to make sure that they pass all the things that are necessary into this field block, or that we want pass this in the future. We could just leave it like this and get errors. But instead, what we can do is we can import prop types from prop-types, and then underneath this, but before our export here, we can actually do field block dot prop types, and this is going to ensure that that we're passing the correct stuff in. So ID, we want to use prop types dot string, and we want to say that it is required. Okay, so the ID is required. We're going to do name, and for that we're going to do prop types dot string. So we're going to make sure that's a string. Our label, we want that to be a prop types. That's going to be string, and it's also going to be required. We'll do type. We'll do prop types dot string is required. Feedback, we want that to be prop types dot string. However, we don't want that one required because we don't necessarily need them to pass anything. And then we're going to do an on change, and this one is going to be a type of function. We want a function passed in there, and that is required. And then we want is invalid, and this is going to be a prop type of Boolean. So we're expecting a Boolean here, and this is also required. So what's happening here now is we set this field block up, and we're giving it these prop types, and we're saying, hey, these are the props that we're expecting to get: ID, name, label, and we're just making sure that they're passed in what we're expecting. We expect all these to be strings. Okay, we expect this one to be a function, and we expect this one to be a Boolean of true or false. Okay, the next thing we can do is we can also set default values up in case they don't pass anything in, which makes development a little bit easier on us. So we can say field block dot default props like this, and then what we do here is we can say, hey, type, this is going to be text. Value will be an empty string, and then is invalid is going to be a Boolean of false by default. Okay, so we could remove the is required out of the prop types here because we're setting up a default, and we're ensuring that it has a default there, but I like to have both here just to, it makes it a little more foolproof for me in the future. So now we have this field block that we can use anywhere in our application. So let's test that out. Let's go ahead now and go to our app index.js where we were playing around with these buttons before. And we can go ahead and remove all of these buttons. And in fact, we can remove the button import. And we're going to add another import. We need to import our field block. So if I import field block from components element field block, we can use that now in our application by typing in the JSX version of it. And we're going to need a couple things with this. So let's give this one an ID equal to, just for example, we're going to do username. And then let's give this a value of empty. We'll give it an on change. Now, I'm going to come back to this on change in just a moment because I need to talk to you about controlled and uncontrolled components in React and how that works. It's probably the most important thing we're going to talk about today in this video. Let's see, so we got value, name, ID. The other thing that we needed was we need to go ahead and do our label. And for the label, let's go ahead and type in username like that. And then we don't need any feedback right now. And we have is invalid. We don't need to pass it in because we have a default set for that. So let's talk about on change. Here's the thing. When you create a field, a form element in React, you either have to have it controlled or uncontrolled. And what that means is if I don't pass in this, let me just pass in an anonymous function here that doesn't do anything like this. And we go ahead and let's refresh here. And now we have username and we have this field. If I start typing something in this field, you can see that like nothing's happening. Like I'm typing, nothing's happening here. So let's inspect and see what's going on here. If we go to the console and we type, we don't have any warnings or errors. So what's really going on here? Well, the fact is that we set this value equal to an empty string, and we can't really do that. the problem with that is that it's always going to be 0. We have no way of updating that value. So what we can do is just temporarily, because we're gonna do something a little bit different than this going forward. But what we could do is we could use state inside of this index or this function here. Let's see. We could say, let me see how we. Let's see. State. And we're going to set that equal to an object here. And inside of state, what I want to do, and let's see what this says here. I got an error here. And it says that state is not defined. And that's because of in the functional world. Let me go ahead and pause this and I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back and I needed to double check the syntax for this because it is quite a bit different when you use internal state with a functional React component versus a class React component. So with a class-based component, you could just use state as an object like this. But state isn't really, since this isn't instantiated into a class, we don't have access to state like that. So instead what we have to do is when we import React, we can also import a method called useState like that from React. And this is the way that functional components use state, okay? So what generally you do here is you would create a destructured array, because useState is going to return two things. One, it's going to return some sort of state object, okay? So in this case, let's go ahead and set up a state for username. So it would be username, and then the second thing it returns is a function called set username or whatever, okay? So it's a function that sets this, and then what we can do is set that equal to useState, and then you can pass a default value in here. So I can just pass an empty string right here, and then what happens is, one second, let me go with you here to React's documentation. I'm missing that right here. What this does is this sets up a destructured array, and useState actually returns an array with two elements in it. The first one is this username, and then the next one is this set username, okay? And now we don't have an error here, we just have a warning because we're not using this. So what we have to do in order to use this state, this internal state, is we have to, in this value here, we're just going to set that equal to username. And I used all lowercase there. So now this squiggly line should go away, if I spell that right, username. So now it's using this constant that's set up, but on change, now we have to use this function here to update this username, okay? And that's how state is used with a functional component. I don't like it as much. It's a lot simpler with using the class-based components, but it's still useful. So, and we're not going to typically be using our syntax going to be a little bit different than this later, and I'm going to show you a much better way that we're going to set up our forms. But for now, we need to talk about this controlled versus uncontrolled thing. So right here, I'm going to use an anonymous function that passes event down, because when we type anything, the onChange function has an event that's passed down into anonymous function here, or whatever function we call. But what we can do here is now I'm going to say set username, and what we're going to set it to is event.target.value. So this is just a JavaScript event.target.value that comes from here. And now what happens, if we go back here, this should be ready to go. Let me clear all this out. And if we type something in here now, you can see that it's updating inside of here. So let's talk about what's actually happening here. First and foremost, if I wanted to use an uncontrolled element, I could do something like this, where we have an input, and I'm just going to give this an ID equal to password. All right. So let's talk about we have this one here. This is the one I just added. And if I just type in here, this appears to be working, okay? This is what's known as an uncontrolled form input in React. And it's uncontrolled because React has no control over the value or the function in here. So this just creates, if you look at the inspector, this just creates an input that has an ID equal to password, okay? Now, why is this not an okay thing? Why would we want to use a controlled element where React controls what's happening versus this? Well, first and foremost, I want other parts of my React application to have access to whatever the value is inside of this. So for example, let's go ahead now, and I'm going to show you an example of this. Let's go ahead and add an H2 up here. And what we're going to do inside this H2 is we're going to say your username will be, and then we'll do a space, and then what I'm going to do here is use our curly bracket syntax to insert something, and we'll just put our username there. And now if I refresh this, you can see that as I type, another part in React, because we are using that state to store this value, other areas of React has access to that value. And what's cool about that now is I don't have to like do any special function or anything like that for the DOM to update up here, because it's pointing at it's using whatever value is in that state here. So now this becomes super awesome because now more elements of React has access to this value than just this input. Whereas I have no way in an uncontrolled element to put something in here and have the rest of it know something. I'd have to like do something where we do some sort of like document.get element by ID password and then get the value. And that's where you get into a lot of the other JavaScript like jQuery. You'd have to do something like that. But because React has control over this, and what I mean by that is I'm passing a value into this and I have a function that updates the value. So this ID, this field or this input that's created through this has no control over its own state. Instead, React is controlling it, and it's controlling it through the value is always equal to this, and we have a function that we're using to set the state equal to there. So when this value does change, it updates this state and then this value gets updated, okay? So it's important to understand that the value that's inside of here, inside of this input, this is never what you aren't typing this in and then it's updating the value. What you're seeing in here is what's being returned through that state variable after it's been updated. You never see, and that's why when I was before we had a function that would update that, I could type whatever I wanted, but it wasn't putting anything in there. In fact, let me demonstrate that to you. So instead of username, if I just put an empty value in there like that, and we come back here, if I type in here, you can see what's happening is that it is setting our state to the first thing, but then its value is always equal to 0. So it's not putting anything into this input, even though I'm typing here. You can see what I'm typing up here, but it's not doing anything because we're not telling it that its value is equal to that username state constant here. But now when I type, now it's updating because of our state function and everything like that, and everything else that needs this information has immediate access to it changing, and that's where the name React kind of comes from. So this concept is a little hard to understand why you would need a function to update a value in an input field, but that's why we need to let React control what's going on here so that I have access to it in the other parts of my application, okay? So with that being said, just for now, we'll go ahead and leave this on here, and we'll do the same thing here with password. So let's set up another state element that we'll say, we'll just call it password, and then we'll have a set password function, and that's going to be created with a use state method like this. And then instead of using this input down here, we're going to do another field block. And in here, we're going to give it an ID of password. We're going to give it a value, and we'll use our curly brackets here. We're going to give it a value of password, which comes from our state now. And then we're going to give it an onChange equal to, oops, an anonymous function. We're going to pass event in to set password, and then we're going to, the value that we're passing into that is event.target.value. Okay, then what we're going to do is let's give this a label equal to password, like that. And let's look at it now. So now we have username and password. If I type here, our H2 is still showing that. And if I type in here, you can see that we can plainly see our password. But if you remember, we added a prop to our field block where we can pass type into it. So let's go ahead and give this a type attribute. And we're just going to give it a type of password. So this should be a password field now. And you can see that it is already updated there to obfuscate the password that's being typed in. All right, so we have a username and a password now. We're well on our way for a login screen. Let's make this field block look a little nicer with some CSS, and we'll call it a video. So I know you guys are probably still a little maybe confused on this state stuff. I would just say that just try to understand the idea that we want to use controlled form inputs most of the time, because we need our React application to have those values available at any time. In order to do that, we're going to need some sort of function to update some sort of value somewhere. And so React has a concept that we call state. And state will allow us to store something. And anything that state is something that can change, you know, and we can change it with these functions here. And when it updates state, anything that's looking at that updated state will re-render on the screen, and it will have that new state value available to it. And it happens incredibly fast. Okay, so let's go ahead and just knock out some CSS here. I think what I'm going to do is let's go down to underneath our buttons and nav styles. Let me go down here to the bottom, and we're going to add another comment here, and let's make this our form styles. All right, and for our form styles, we want to do if a div has a form group, we want to give this a width of 100% of its available space, and then we're going to give it a margin bottom of 24 pixels to give it some breathing room. All right, and I actually got a 0 there for some reason. And then what we're going to do is we're going to style up our form group label. So if there's a label within that form group, then what we want to be able to do is give it a display of block so that it breaks down to a new line, and we want to give it a margin bottom as well of 8 pixels. So let's see what that looks like. You can see already that this is starting to look a little more reasonable. Let's continue to style up that just a little bit more. Let's give a div form group, and let's go ahead and style up our form control inside of that. So any form control inside of our form group, we're going to give this a width also of 100%. And then what we want to do is give it a border of 1 pixel solid, and then we'll use our variable here and our theme dark color. And then we'll also give this a margin bottom of 8 pixels. I want to set the height of this a little bit thicker, so we'll do 38 pixels. And then let's give it a border radius of 6 pixels. And then we're going to give it some padding of 6 pixels on top and bottom, and then let's give it 12 on left and right. And then let's set the font size here to be 14 pixels. Let's save that, and now you can see we got this form group that grows to fill its entire element that it's in. And now you can see we got some padding, and we got some border radius and our color here. So let's continue on. The other thing is I didn't really like our focus, so let's go ahead and change our border color when it's focused. And we can do that by doing div form group. And inside that, we're gonna go ahead and get the form control that has the focus pseudo class, and we're gonna say outline none. Thanks Google Chrome. And then we'll do border color, and we're gonna pass our variable of theme accent into that. So that should give us our theme accent color. So you can see it turns to that nice blue color when we focus these inputs here. So that's cool. Let's see. The other thing that we need to style up is feedback. So let's go to our index here and let's add feedback, and let's add some feedback right here. And let's just give it feedback of must be 8 characters. And let's see what that looks like. All right, so it puts that there. So let's go ahead and make that look a little nicer. Go to our app.css here, and we'll do a div.formGroup, and then we'll do a paragraph with form feedback. Let's make the font size a little smaller. So we had 14 in the thing, so let's use 12. We'll do the color. Wow. We use our variable, and here we're going to use a gray medium. And then we're going to give this a padding of top and bottom 0 pixels and left and right 6 pixels. And now you can see that this is styled up just to be a little help text below there. So that's that. Then what we're going to do is we want to know if this is an error. So let's go ahead and mimic an error here. So we'll do spam call is invalid. We're going to pass in a boolean of true now. And so to make sure that that style looks correct, let me turn off my heater. Sorry about that, guys. It is a little cold in here. Maybe it'll run for a second. We're going to say if it has a form group that also has a class of is invalid, and it is a .form feedback, then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and set the color to our danger color variable that we had set up. And now you can see that that's that red danger color there. Now also, if it's invalid, we also want to do a div form group dot is invalid. And then we're going to say if it is a class of form control or form control with a pseudo class of focus, then we're going to make the border color of that element also be our danger color. So we'll have a red border outline, and you can see that right there. So our border outline, even if we click into it, it's still red if this is an invalid feedback. We could do the same thing if you wanted to go ahead and do your labels. Sometimes applications will make the labels red too. I find that just to be a little bit too much. I don't really like making that red, but you could just add CSS here that basically, if it is form feedback, or if it is, you could do something like label like that. Let's see if that worked. Yeah, so that will make your label red as well. I don't know. I don't really like all three of those being red, so I think I'm going to leave mine just black, but you could make it red just as easy by doing that. All right, so that now we have these form elements kind of styled up the way that I want them styled up. And I think that's a good place for us to drop off for the video. We're gonna go ahead and I'll leave these field blocks and everything into this app index.js for this branch. And just play around with these with state. Setting state is pretty cool with functional. I think it's a little easier, at least to set up state initially with a class-based component, but this is what they gave us. This is actually a hook into React. They call these hooks, and that is a use state React hook. Later we're going to use a few more to make this even more powerful, so that we can create forms and have them have their own functions to update their blocks and things like that. All right, guys. Well, I will see you in the next video. I hope you're enjoying this. Please, please, please comment, like, subscribe. Let me know in the comments if you don't understand something or what you've learned in the videos. Let's keep some conversation going. Let me know if you're enjoying this series, and I will see you guys in the next video, and we'll continue on building our React application. Peace out.